All right, good morning, ladies and gents again. This morning, we are going to look at the JBCC Small and Simple Works contract. I know we've only got 30 minutes, so we are going to go through it fairly quickly. Before we start, I'm not an attorney, and my content does not constitute legal advice, okay? It is my understanding of the subject matter only. I am, in fact, a quantity surveyor arbitrator, and I spend my life resolving disputes generally. Okay, so for those participants that are familiar with the JBCC, the Joint Building Contracts Committee, they have been publishing what we call standard form agreements for about 20, actually it's more than 20 years now. What they never had previously was an agreement that you could use for the smaller and simpler works, and more importantly, where there was no principal agent. Okay, so those contracts where you're dealing on a domestic basis directly with a client, and you get permission to do what works, and it's just the employer is the client and yourself. Let's call you the contractor. Okay, so there was never an agreement like that, and in 2018 they decided there's definitely a gap in the market, and we need to publish something for the smaller and simple works agreement, and so it was born. Now this agreement is available for purchase directly from the JBCC. There's the website address for you, and as far as I know, you can also buy it from the Master Builders Association in your area. Okay, you can also buy it electronically, as a matter of fact. Okay, so let's move on. This agreement is suitable, as I said, when you are a main contractor. Okay, that doesn't mean you have to be a building contractor. Of course, you can be a plumbing contractor. A principal agent, remember that is the agent of the employer on big contracts. So this contract does actually allow for a principal agent to be used, but I would suggest that if there is a principal agent, then you go for one of the bigger contracts like the minor works agreement. So I'm going to stick with my belief that this agreement should be used when there's no principal agent. Okay, simple projects, okay? And design is done by professionals. They can either be normally employed by the developer. Okay, you can do your own design. The agreement does cater for that. Very importantly, no escalation is applicable. So on the bigger contracts and jobs, you will note that there may be provisions for the payment of escalation in raw material prices, labor, etc., any resource, as a matter of fact. This contract doesn't have that. It does not mean that you can't add that on at the end as an addendum. So if you're on a long contract or you're highly exposed to raw material price fluctuations, can put provisions in for that. Okay, but it's very relevant and useful contract for contractors contracting directly with employers for small and simple works, instead of contracting on the back of a quote. All right. The agreement is broken down into 12 sections. Okay, and as with all JBCC contracts, there is a section in the front called definitions and interpretations. Okay, and that alone is nearly 3 pages long. The reason for that is that words that are used in the agreement are carefully defined in the first 3 pages in bold letters, as a matter of fact. And whenever you see those words, should I say, in bold letters, in bold, it means that you must come back to the definitions to find out what they are. Okay, now we certainly haven't got time to go through 3 pages of definition, but I just want to go through some of the most important ones for you. So there is a contract sum. That is basically your tender amount. Okay, always includes tax, and the contract sum never changes. In other words, there's a defined sum, which is your tender price, that gets recorded in the agreement as a contract sum, and there are certain things that are linked to your contract sum, such as retention. It never changes. Okay, the only thing that changes is the contract value. Okay, so the contract value starts as being the same as the contract sum, and as you get variations, alterations, and additions to your scope, the contract value changes. Okay, and evolves. There's a section called contract data. Now, That is the most important section for you to pay attention to if you're going to use this agreement, as it is with all JBCC agreements. So there's no document that can cover for all eventualities on a construction site. Okay? So you have what's called the generic wording, which is the body of the document. Then at the back, you have the contract sum, which is a number of pages. And there you record what I call the variables. Okay? The scope of work, is there a bill of quantities, who's taking out insurance, who's providing utilities, very important these days because the cost of utilities is high. When are you getting site? When are you expected to reach what's known as practical completion, i.e. the works can be used for the intended purpose? How are you getting paid? What happens if there's a dispute? Okay, very important, etc., etc. So if you elect to use this document, what you should do is sit down with your client, the employer, and you populate pages 12 to 16 at the back. Okay, and you put in as much detail as you can. Okay, there is a construction period. So when you're using any type of standard form contract, you are going to have to commit to a program, okay, or a length of time, should I say. So just be wary of that because there will be a penalty that's connected to that. Okay? So when you are negotiating with the client and you're deciding how long it's going to take you, make sure you have ample time to execute your works, please. Okay. It goes on to define defects. Okay. The employer, as I mentioned, that is your client. Practical completion, I'll read it for you quickly. That stage of completion when the works are certified as complete, except for minor defects or incomplete work identified in a list for completion. Okay, it's safe and allows the employer to use the works for the intended purpose. Now, it's very important to have a definition for practical completion. So there's no argument about over when, well, there shouldn't be an argument, but when the works are actually complete. Okay, and you'll note I said except for minor defects. Okay, so an employer or a client cannot force you to attend to every single small aesthetic snag and detail before they accept the work back from you. Okay, so it's very important. And on it goes, like I said, there's 3 pages. There's retention as well. Okay, so it contemplates that an amount of money is going to be held back as retention, and then it gets released as the works progress. Okay, and there's a mechanism in the agreement to explain that. All right. It then goes on in section 2 to insurances and indemnities, and this is something I found, excuse me, that people overlook, and there's a blurring of responsibility, and people don't actually know who is providing insurance. And then if something goes wrong, all right, how do we submit an insurance claim? So these are the type of things that are typically left off the back of a quote, or even worse, when you enter into an agreement without any paperwork whatsoever. So here, it talks about who is providing what. Okay? Normally, under this small and simple works contract, the employer is responsible for providing works insurance. Okay? And that is because you are often doing work on an existing structure or building. So you cannot divorce the obligation to insure, because if something goes wrong, how do you work out which insurance company needs to pay for what? So that you're just looking for a dispute if a contractor tries to take out their own insurance for works insurance and public liability. Okay, public liability you certainly can do on your own, but definitely not works insurance. So here you can explain to your client, dear client, please can you make sure that you inform your insurer that we're going to be doing these works, so he knows about it. Otherwise, if something goes wrong and we have a flood or a hurricane and we flatten whatever we've been building, we can make a claim. Okay, and the employer is never going to get involved in your own labor, plant, and equipment. So here you would have to go and get that insurance, which you've probably already got in place, isn't it? your workman's compensation, and your insurance on your own plant and equipment, etc. Okay, I've put a last bullet there for you. If the employer instructs a contractor to proceed without planning approval, he indemnifies the contractor. Now, this is another great area I've come across, especially with all the delays and councils these days with the result of COVID and who knows what else. So you often find that an employer wants to start part of his, or start his project, but he hasn't got his plans approved, isn't it? So he indemnifies you against that, because you're not allowed to do that. But if he instructs you to do it, then he takes all the risk of it. That's a nice provision to have in a contract, in my opinion. Okay, then it goes on to execution, setting out, and program. Now, contractor must supply a program. Now, I know this may be foreign to a lot of the participants or listeners today, but a program is just a diagraphic representation of the work. You do not have to do it on an expensive software program. Okay? You can actually do it on Excel. You can do it by hand. Right? And to me, if you don't do a program, you should start getting in the habit of doing it. And no matter how simple it is. So no one understands the scope of work better than you. You've got, let's say you've got a set of drawings. Either you've designed it yourself, or somebody else has designed it on behalf of the engineer. You have a look at the drawings and you establish, right, this is my scope. I'm going to start here, I'm going to end there, A to Z. How am I going to do it? Right, I've got 3 months. Just draw out graphically on a bar chart. Okay, the first activity is set up site, mobilize a container, whatever, start excavation for sewer pipes, whatever it is you're doing, and just do a bar chart that says, okay, so over the 3 months, that's how I'm going to do it. Okay. Then, if there are variation orders on the project that attract extra time, you can pull that program out, all right, and you can say to your client, well, look, this is the way it was. Now you've asked me to do this extra work. I need extra time, so I'm going to change this bar chart. Okay. Of course, the employer hands over the boundary pegs, and the contractor sets out. Okay, very important. Don't start setting out a site until the employer has told you, okay, this is the site. It's not your obligation to check that you're on the right earth, okay, etc. But you do have to set out your work. Okay? I've seen lots of disputes around that, where things are built in the wrong place. One of the reasons I like this contract is that it can accommodate a various number of what we call direct contractors. So you may have a plumber, an electrician, a roofer, whatever. And it's quite difficult to get these contractors to interface under other agreements. But this agreement is very simple. It's a small section that just says that's the way it's going to work. Okay? And you have to allow other direct contractors to execute their works. Okay? If it's critical for a trade that needs your trade or comes after your trade, then you should put that in the program. Okay, so you may have to wait for a builder to finish something who's working on a direct contract with the employer before you can start something of your scope with whatever it is. So you put that in your program. Here's a key date here. All excavations must be finished by the builder. All superstructure brickwork needs to be done. So I can start chasing whatever on that date. Okay. You're allowed to claim expense and loss caused by other direct contractors. So if someone else causes, damages your works, holds you up, interferes with you, causes you expense, there's a mechanism in the agreement to go to your client and say, you know what, I never priced for that. I'm not obliged to pay for it. I want compensation for it. Okay. It's one of the only agreements that caters for a number of direct contracts with a client. So in the bigger sense, you would have a contractor who had a subcontract with all of these different trades. In this instance, contemplates there's no main contractor. Okay. Of course, very importantly, is the section on payment. Now, like I said, you've got to go to the contract data and you've got to record your terms of payment there. And it can be in whatever format you like. Okay? You can say, I want to get paid a deposit of 20%. When I've done first fix, I want to get paid another milestone, second fix, third fix, or I want to get paid monthly when I do a valuation. It's okay. You can do whatever you like. Just record it in the contract data. Make sure your client understands it. Now, I haven't got time to discuss the concept of preliminaries in this session. Safe to say that prelims is basically your indirect site running costs, okay? Your hire of containers, toilets, foremen, health and safety, etc. Insurance that you are obliged to take would fall under there. You can price a prelims, we call it, or P&G. If you don't, the document automatically assumes that it's 7.5% of your original contract sum, which is fair and reasonable. And the reason that's been put in there is so that if there are extensions of time, you can claim extra money for those indirect costs. Okay, very, very important. Let's say you get delayed by 2 months by the employer. You're not going to want to fight over what are you going to be compensated for indirect costs. It's already in the agreement. Either you priced it or it defaults to 7.5. So you just go to the agreement and you say, we take the number of working days that was in the original program. Okay, we know what our P&G is. It's either a number or it's 7.5%. We divide one by the other, we get a rate per day. And if you extend it by 10 working days, you just add on 10 days of P&G. No dispute. Okay. Default payment is 7 calendar days from invoice or certificate. So a certificate means there's a principal agent who's going to issue a payment certificate. Let's not consider that for now, but the default payment is 7 calendar days. If that's not what you want to agree with your employer, you make a change in the contract data. No argument later on. Okay. This agreement does not allow for what's called construction guarantees or performance guarantees. Okay, it only allows for cash retention. And that is quite onerous. I've highlighted it in red and bolded it for you. So the employer is allowed to hold 10% retention on all payments. When you hand over the site for practical completion, it's going to kick down to 5%. Right? And then it's going to release, after the rectification of all the minor defects and snags, you're going to get your full retention released. If that's not what you want to agree with your client, then you can agree something else in the contract data. But that's where it defaults. Okay. Then it goes on to section 6, which is the adjustment of contract value and final account. What I often find is that there are disputes that arise at the end of a project when a plumber or a builder or anyone in the built environment working on a project, they present their final account or their last claim, and then the employer is like, oh no, I don't know about all of these things. Why are you only telling me about these extras now? So this document, and it's only 6 clauses, that's all you need, and it covers what happens. Okay? So it's up to the contractor, the plumber, whoever the contractor is, to manage this process. Okay? So if you get a change to a drawing, or your employer comes on site and makes changes on site, which he's going to put in writing for you, you're never going to accept an oral instruction. Okay? Then you're going to write back to him and you're going to say, okay, thank you for that. So there's my costing for that. Okay, it's going to impact the contract value. And this is the impact on my program, okay, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now, it also has time periods in it for the conclusion of what we call the final account. Okay, so what often happens is time just passes and delays and months tick past before a small contractor can agree his final payment on a project. So this document deals with that, okay? And it needs to be done within 15 business days of the date of final completion. All right. So at least you know that's what it means. And you've also got a certain number of time to accept it. So there's if you get the document, you just need to go read clause 6, very easy to understand. As I said, the employer can give you written instructions only. Okay. There are no oral instructions whatsoever. Okay. And my advice to people generally is that you should never accept instructions by social media. So it's very easy for a client to walk around the site and do a WhatsApp recording on the cell phone and send you recording after recording, and there's 15 messages. By the time you sit down at your desk and have a look at all, you don't even know what's going on anymore. So if a client does that, you tell them, no, that's not the way we do it. Okay? If you want to give me instructions, you send me an email and you spell it out precisely in there. Either you give me extra work to do, you've got a complaint about quality, you want to make a change, you're telling me to stop, whatever it is. Okay, no oral instructions whatsoever. It doesn't even contemplate someone giving you an instruction and then you write back to confirm it. Okay, as with all the JBCCs work like that. You do have to execute contract instructions as long as they do not substantially change the nature of the works. That's fairly reasonable. Okay. So you're allowed to receive, and you're allowed to execute instructions as you receive them. Okay. In the main JBCC documents, there's a 90-day period between practical and final completion. Remember what I said? Practical completion, you can move in. The works can be used for their intended purpose. Okay. This document, there then is a 60-day period to attend to all of the minor defects and little things that you have to do. Okay. Both of those dates are very important. So practical completion, like I've said, your retention is going to kick down. And at final completion, all of your retention is going to be released, and that is a 2-month period. And then remember what I said, you've then got only 10 days after that, or 15 days to agree your final account. No reason why you can't agree your final account long before final completion. You should agree it straight after practical completion, as a matter of fact, because you should not be doing any new works after practical. Okay. So I like that. You know, there's a system for you to follow. Clients and employers can't do whatever they like. This is what they need to do. And then time is against us, but I'll just very quickly tell you about this. You can get revisions to the date for practical completion. Okay, that's it. And there are some events that attract cost, and there are some that don't. So if there's a force majeure event, such as a COVID lockdown or a hurricane or flood, then you'll get extra time to complete, but you won't get compensated for your preliminaries. But if you've got variation orders or other events that have got nothing to do with the contractor, they were brought on by the employer, then you can get extra time and you can get extra preliminaries. Normally, that is a sense of argument on contracts, because now the client doesn't want to pay more for your prelims. So this document spells it out. And my advice, when you are signing a document like this, you must work through it briefly with your client so that he's got no surprises. Okay. There are penalties, like I said, and you record them in the contract data. Don't leave it blank. Don't leave things open for interpretation. Fill a penalty in. Of course, you want to make that penalty as small as possible. Okay, 500 Rand a day, whatever. Remember, when you start a project, you're normally in the honeymoon period. So most people are happy to sign and fill in whatever. And you don't want to be dealing with stuff at the end. Possibly there's been a dispute or disagreements. You don't want to then have to start agreeing things. You're going to find it much more difficult to agree. Okay, the contract then goes on and talks about when you can suspend, when you can terminate. For example, if a client hasn't paid you, you can definitely suspend and terminate. And very importantly, it's got a section on dispute resolution. Okay, so if there's a dispute, you don't have to go to court, which is a nightmare. You can go to mediation, adjudication, or arbitration. So I've actually got a lot in here. Okay, to me, those are the preferred disputes to resolve small construction disputes, the preferred mechanisms. Mediation probably the easiest, cheapest, and the most effective in this instance. Okay, and then the document concludes with 4 pages of the contract data. And like I said, please, okay, you must submit everything, fill everything in here. Okay? It even contemplates section 1. You sit with your employer and you go through all of it. Of course, you need to go through it. How are you going to price if you don't know who's providing the insurance? You need to know. So go through all that with your employer, then you submit a price, okay, and then you conclude the document. So that's about it. It leaves nothing to chance. It's a small document. It's easy to read. It gives your client a sense of professionalism, I think, okay? And it's one of the only agreements that contemplates no principal agent, as I've said before.